Good afternoon, everyone. Dana's clapping her hands, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tara Marshall, and I work for the City of Trinidad as the Development Services Director. One of the most favorite things that we do in the Development Services Department is historic preservation. The other favorite thing we do is economic development. So Trinidad offers a unique opportunity to bring those two tools together. And if you're talking historic preservation and economic development, and you've lived ever in the state of Colorado, then you know the name Dana Crawford. And it's my pleasure to introduce her and have her come up and talk a little bit about our speaker. Dana has the most outstanding record of historic preservation through economic development. And we feel very fortunate.
My net worth isn't so good.
And we feel fortunate in the city of Trinidad that she has recognized that we have the highest concentration of historic buildings per capita in the West. And if you don't believe me, Governor Hickenlooper is the one who said that. So we'll ask quote the governor. So thank you, Dana, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, Dana Crawford.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to be back in Trinidad and to see many of you. And first of all, of course, I always want to recognize what Tara Marshall does, because she's just kind of Scotch tape and Elmer's glue of the very best quality, and puts a lot of these things together in an amazing way. And so we all say thank you very much to Tara. I came down here 3 years ago in June, and Tara had a gigantic track set that has been extremely effective. And so, in a way, this is kind of a combination of a lot of our dreams. Thank History Colorado, previously known as the rather stuffy Colorado Historical Society. Now we're History Colorado. And as the archaeologists say, we dig. So I'm just so glad to see all of you, and when Donovan finishes talking, we're going to have a little extra time, and we want to go around and introduce ourselves. If you can't remember your name, you should excuse yourself now. Whenever I come to Mount Carmel and I'm in this room, Jay, I think about how much I admire this rug, and how the first time that I was here, I told the family that I admired the rug. Well, it turned out that they had a huge argument about this rug. And I just want to point out to you how handsome it is. And those people of the Tonino family that didn't like it should probably be quite ashamed. So it's my pleasure now to introduce a fellow that I've known for a really long time. And he used to live in South Dakota. And he's been living in our nation's theme park, Washington, D.C., since 85. And he travels all over the world and studies and talks and writes about, surprise, historic preservation. And on your table, you have copies of a book, one of the first books that he wrote, which he confessed as we were driving down here that he really hates writing these books. So you have to recognize that an enormous amount of effort went into it. But there are also sign-up sheets on every table. And if you want us to order more books, we try to, but Amazon is responsible for the books, and they don't have quite as many printed up as we needed. So if you want to be involved with them, write your names down on the table, or you could find Georgie. Wave your hand, Georgie. And she will help you sign up to get one of the books. I'm really excited to introduce Donovan, and he can tell you a little bit about how he became involved with this field. But now he told me that he has to be on the road at least 220 nights out of the year. So I'm hoping to meet his wife sometime to assure her that, you know, it's very important that he do that and that he goes to historic places that are hotels. And it's really difficult for me to explain how important he's been, because many people are interested in old buildings and they don't really recognize that the old buildings somehow or another have to get renewed and have to carry their own weight financially. And so he speaks at the corner of historic preservation and good economics, which I found makes the bankers much happier. So Donovan, if you would take it away and entertain us, why we would greet you with a great applause.
Well, I guess I'm lucky that it happened to be this particular day, because on many days, if you would have said, if you can't remember your own name, leave now, many days I would have had to leave now. So talk about it later.
That's not very reassuring.
Well, I know. Yeah, you tell them your net worth is not great. I'm telling you my memory is not great. So it just kind of makes us even. Dana, of course, is, if you don't know, you should. It's not just that she's a Colorado legend. She's a legend everywhere. And when I was getting started in South Dakota, yeah, I know. And but when you have, you know what I've learned? You can say anything, but once you have the damn microphone, you can say whatever you damn well please. So that's what I do. Well, when I was getting started in preservation, doing small-scale development in Rapid City, it really was Larimer Square. I mean, Denver was our big city. It was Larimer Square, and so the legend came to life with me, with Dina. So when she called a few months ago and said, "Hey, I'm doing some work in Trinidad. We'd like you to come down," it was not a microsecond of hesitation that I did to come down. So some of yours, they're stuck with me, for Dana and I, for a couple of sessions today, and I just want to make the kind of distinction between the two. And we had a nice month ago, a nice kind of conference call with the people here, and Dana and her crew and I, about what these should be. And here's kind of how I've divided it, is I really want to talk now about this role as a kind of policy side, the role of the ways that historic preservation adds to a local economy, that really is economic development. So I kind of want to frame it in this session. And in the second session, I want to talk, it'll be those of you who are numbers geek guys being male and female guys, will be happier with the second one, because I really want to talk about lots of the findings, new quantifiable findings about preservation and the link to economics over the last few years. But I first want to start out with this issue of why historic preservation and economic development. I am the kind of polar opposite of an academic. I'm just not an academic at all. But I do, in the spring of every year, teach a class on the economics of historic preservation in a graduate program at the University of Pennsylvania. And I love it because I learn way more from my students than they learn from me. And a few years ago, I had one of my students, Jen Gates, who was taking a different class. They'd taken my class, was taking a different class in economic development. And she and her professor were writing an article on economic development. And so she sent out an email to a number of acquaintances of hers, including me, simply asking for the definition of economic development. So what is economic development? And I thought about it, and my first response was this: economic development is the conscious, organized effort to improve a local economy. But I thought, at least from my experience, that wasn't sufficient. That in fact, while that's economic development, that if you want effective, sustainable economic development, that there are 8 tests that have to be made. First of all, there has to be positive, measurable benefits. You have to demonstrate, in fact, something's happening. Second, the benefits themselves extend beyond the short term. Third, that the public benefits are greater than the public costs. Fourth, that the benefits are primarily local and are broadly distributed. That there are significant qualitative as well as quantitative benefits. That incentives, when you use them, are a catalyst to encourage subsequent market-based economic activity. That when you have incentives, they are not bribes, that they meet the but-for test, that but for the incentive, this is not going to take place. And finally, that when you have incentives, that you pair the carrots with the sticks. That in fact, that because it's public resources going on, it's perfectly appropriate for then the public side to set the framework for the kind of benefit. So I want to just put those to the side and then come back at the end and talk about those in terms of historic preservation. There's lots of reasons for economic development, including increasing property tax revenue, increasing property values, a whole range of things. But in the end, it seems to me, and I'm a preservationist, I guess, but I'm really in the business of economic development, that in the core of economic development ought to be about creating jobs. And historic preservation is an extraordinarily effective means of getting human beings to have jobs. And they're primarily local jobs. Now, Dana, on our drive down from Denver this morning, Dana was saying, well, a lot of times to get the people we need to work in these buildings, we have to bring them from Pueblo. Well, I'm glad some of you from here from Pueblo, but that represents then an opportunity. Whenever there's a missing piece in the market, it really represents an opportunity for local job growth because there's no inherent reason that those plumbers, carpenters, electricians, whatever, masons, can't in fact be working on Trinidad buildings and living in Trinidad. Here's one of the kind of, forget the gargoyles and cornices, here's one of the things about historic preservation that makes it have such a strong local economic impact. As a rule of thumb, just a general principle, if you build a new building in the United States, half of the money is going to go for labor, half of the money is going to go for materials. If you do the rehabilitation of an historic building, spending the same amount of money, 60 to 70% of that money will go for labor with the balance of materials. And that makes a huge difference in terms of a local economy because of what happens. That when we hire the plumber to install the sink, once the sink is installed, the sink doesn't spend any more money. And we may have bought the sink from China, who knows? But the plumber does. The plumber goes home, joins the YMCA, buys groceries, gets a haircut, every time recirculating that money locally. So the same amount of dollars expended, the impact directly and indirectly on the local economy is decidedly greater. And then this issue, I mean, I wrote the PowerPoint before we drove down this morning, but if you think of a public policy statement for economic development, if you have skills that are needed, if your fundamental core of economic development is the creation of jobs, and if there are people who don't have jobs, that's a perfect kind of match of situation where you look at this labor shortage as a means of enhancing skills and putting those jobs to work. And the good thing about those jobs is that they are reasonably well-paid jobs, particularly for those without advanced formal education. So you're getting good local jobs, recirculate those money in the local economy. So we did a study a couple of years ago in Utah and just looked at what happens in that state if you spend $1 million rehabilitating historic building. Well, that means a little over 2 direct jobs and another 7.5 indirect jobs. That means about $537,000 in paychecks and another $310,000 in indirect salaries from those paychecks. That $1 million in that project generates in the state of Utah almost another $1 million elsewhere in the economy. And I know this is Trinidad, Colorado. I can guess what the political bent is. I'm telling you, you spend that $1 million, there's $200,000 that did not go to Washington, that stays in the local economy. That tax credit means it's money that otherwise, prima facie, otherwise would have gone to the federal treasury, that stays in the local economy. Now, you can like or dislike this administration or the last one, but I'm telling you, keeping your money at home is a better deal than sending it where I live in Washington. I live exactly halfway between the White House and Congress. I live on 8th Street. Neither side has ever dropped by my apartment and kind of asked, but I'm just... okay. Here, and it's just not a random thing that the generation, that this combination of numbers of jobs created and the income those jobs represent, we use a econometric model called M-Plan, and it measures, you say, here's amount of output, what does that do in terms of jobs and incomes? In the combination, and there's 435 categories of every economic activity you can imagine. It has a list. Here's how many if you get a haircut, here's what that means. There are very few industries of all those 435 that have a greater combination of impacts between numbers of jobs and the payroll that those jobs represent than does historic preservation. Now here we did a study in Georgia. Georgia taxpayers a few years ago spent, I don't know, $1 gazillion to recruit an automobile manufacturer. That's fine, it's their money, I don't care. But $1 million worth of automobile manufacturing in the state of Georgia creates 3.5 jobs in the state of Georgia, $245,000 in paychecks. Some of you have been through that horrible airport, the Atlanta airport. So $1 million with those airline tickets is a little short of 9 jobs and $476,000 in income. You build a new building in Georgia, 15 jobs and $616,000 in income. You spend that same $1 million rehabilitating a historic building, 18 jobs and $750,000. Where is the economic development? Same amount of economic activity, but a huge difference in terms of numbers of jobs and payrolls that jobs represent. One of the issues, in fact, we were talking about it driving down, about how many towns and cities, not just in the U.S. but all over the world, are kind of undifferentiated from the other. I'm telling you, this issue about the differentiation of cities is critical. You're not competing in Trinidad, Colorado with Pueblo and Steamboat Springs. You're competing with every city, town and city around the world, every one of those. And you don't win the economic development competitive game by being like every place else. In fact, you win by differentiating yourself from other places. And you look for those local characteristics that make you different. And this issue about differentiation is really critically important. I told David that I spent 220 nights on hotel rooms. Never as nice as the Crawford Hotel in Denver, like I stayed last night, but 219 nights a year in some crappy hotel room someplace, and then once a year in a great place. But a third of that's international. We have a little separate company called Heritage Strategies International. We've worked in 50 countries and so forgive me, but I'm going to bring some kind of international principles and observations into this kind of presentation as well. Here's from a really smart woman who was at the University of Singapore. And listen to what she says. The influence of the globalizations have fostered the rise of heritage conservation, the rest of the world's what we call historic preservation, as a growing need to preserve the past, both for continued economic growth and for strengthening national cultural identity. Not a kind of frills, extra frosting thing, fundamental to economic development. Then there's issue about the sense of ownership. You know, and this is particularly true in downtowns. And I know you're a Main Street program, and I'm going to talk a little this session, a lot next session, about the great success story that Main Street has been. But you know, the downtowns and their historic buildings are the one place where, when they're good, that people think are theirs that have nothing to do with who the deed holders happen to be. This is my downtown. Everybody says, this is my downtown. This is our downtown. And if your relatives come, I want to take you to our downtown. Now, I'm not against shopping centers. We all have our favorite shopping center. But nobody thinks of our shopping center. No, some REIT owns that. But we think about it as our downtown. And that sense of ownership is really important for this whole range of things like resiliency, community commitment, volunteerism, this whole range of things. They're really fundamental, not in some like cutesy extra thing, fundamental to economic development. And then there's this sense of continuity that we didn't just pop up yesterday. Now there's this whole thing, the new urbanism movement, and they do some good things. And sometimes they like to claim, well, we're building your main streets, we're just building the new subdivisions. Well, yeah, but they weren't there yesterday and they are today. That's not the same thing as seeing a century of evolution. This happens to be in Portland, Maine, and here in half a block is 3 centuries worth of buildings. And that continuity gives us a sense of, well, we just didn't pop up yesterday. In fact, there's a history, there's a meaning, there's a message in this community. You know, in large cities, and I work in both really big places and really little places, sometimes there's departments of economic development and there's departments of community development. I'm telling you, historic preservation is the one strategy that at the same time is both. That when you do historic preservation for economic development purposes, you're automatically, in fact, getting a community development benefit. I'm glad, I guess, that there's Amazon and Microsoft and General Motors and that stuff. And I'm a market-driven guy, but I'm a small business person. I'm a big fan of small businesses. And there's this extraordinary pattern of older and historic buildings, especially smaller ones, just being a natural business incubator for small businesses. The correlation of that, and again, the session later I'll talk about some numbers of this, is that there's this disproportionate share of startup businesses that choose to start up in historic neighborhoods, historic buildings. It's not random. And it's driven mostly by two things. Sometimes it's a cost thing, sometimes because they're cheaper, but it's added to that because there's a quality of character that those buildings represent. And then this issue of local businesses. Again, I am not against Target or Walmart or the Gap. I'm not against those things. But I'm telling you the secondary impact on your local community, hugely different with a locally owned business than with the chain. Huge difference. Less, you know, the widget shop downtown owned by the local guy is not going to generate the sales tax that Walmart is. But in terms of those share of those dollars that are spent that stay in the community, huge difference with locally owned businesses. And it's that woman who's, you know, coaching the soccer club on Friday afternoon and doing the church, you know, thing in the basement on Saturday morning. Huge difference. And there's this natural link between older historic buildings and local businesses. And then there's this draw in evidence to come, a draw of this knowledge workers and creative class workers to historic buildings. Now, sometimes that whole thing can be overrated, and you say, oh, geez, you know, we're going to be all the creative class thing. Well, then statistically, that is never going to be a huge share of the local economy directly. But it is a role in the economy that spills out and affects a whole bunch of other things, so that their kind of weight class is way above their numbers in attracting the kind of creative class and the knowledge-based workers. There was a great study done by a Turkish guy, actually, in Australia, and kind of looking at this kind of change in cities in the early 21st century, and he came up with these four principles. The sustainable city needs a sustainable economy, of course. That a sustainable economy needs knowledge workers. That knowledge workers, most of whom can live any place, make their location decision based on the quality of urban environment, and this means urban environment in any scale, means a city, and that heritage buildings are a major component of urban quality. So, that study I'm going to come back to. Then there's this issue about a building is not just four walls and a roof. A building for business, whether it's a retail or office or whatever, a professional building, a building is also a reflection of the character and quality of what's going on inside those four walls. Now again, I'm not against Walmart, I'm not against them at all. It is not an accident that Walmart builds crappy, cheap buildings. It's not that they're out of money. The building itself shouts out, cheap stuff here. That's what the building's saying. Nothing wrong with that. They know their marketing. But the buildings that house local businesses, specialty businesses, quality businesses, they frequently let the building itself be a reflection of the character and quality of the activities inside that building. And again, this issue that the guy from Australia, that historic resources are really part of the quality of life criteria. We all have different things. We like the outdoors. We like, you know, whatever. We want to go skiing. We want to go hunting. We want to, you know, we want good schools. We want to go to the opera. Whatever. We have our own criteria of what quality of life means to us. But just consistency, this fabric of the evolution of the city is part of that quality of life criteria. And here's a, you know, I kind of get called an economist sometimes, and Dr. Kent, my professor at the University of South Dakota for state and local taxation, from whom I got a D. I would be rolling over in his grade if you recall anybody referred to me as an economist. I bluffed my way through it. Here's a real one. I got a Nobel Prize. And this is what he says. Over the long term, places with strong, distinctive identities are more likely to prosper than places without them. Every place must identify its strongest, most distinctive features and develop them, or run the risk of being all things to all persons and nothing special to any. Livability is not a middle-class luxury, it is an economic imperative. And we were just in awe when we drove around this morning. I've been to Colorado lots in my life, but I've not been, I will confess to say, in the town of Trinidad, just in awe of this kind of physical fabric of the character we have here. A guy that I met in a long, boring way, I don't have to tell you, but was in charge of attracting direct foreign investment to Ireland. And particularly in Dublin, in Ireland, was excluded from any incentives. The public policy said you can't pay. But over the last, even through the kind of crash and recovery, Dublin has been this extraordinary magnet of young, smart, knowledge workers, creative workers, and so he made a map of where all those firms were located. Now, some of them, there it is, and you know, all of PayPal, Digital Hub, Yahoo, Facebook, Google, they're all present in Dublin. So he says, in charge of doing this, he said, now, why did that happen? Why did those people come here? We're not giving them a bunch of money. Why did they come? And he said, well, first thing, they're coming because we got a whole bunch of smart, well-educated young people here. So then, well, from all over Europe. So then his question to himself was, well, why did they come here? And, well, they came here because of quality of life elements that they saw in Dublin. They came. They didn't come for the job. They came and the job found them. And this is a pattern that shifted in much of the world, but certainly in America in the last 30 years. For most of American history, people followed jobs. It's a migration from the east to the west, from the north to the south, was people following jobs. In the last 25 years, it's jobs following people. People are going, at least a big segment of the population, is going where they want to live, and the job finds them, the job follows them. Sometimes they bring their job with them. My little firm of 5 people, we live in 4 different cities, and that's just the kind of more and more, every one of whom is being chosen because of the quality of life of that particular person. Anyway, so this guy from Ireland, this Irish guy says, has become a huge fan of heritage conservation because he sees that in Dublin how much contribution of that heritage character is what constitutes the quality of life that's attracting these young, smart people. And then you have a Main Street program here, congratulations. It is, I'm in the economic development business, and there is no more cost-effective program of economic development in the country, period, 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 no exceptions. And I don't mean for downtown revitalization, I don't care. Anything on a cost-effective basis, nothing is more cost-effective than Main Street, and later this afternoon I'll talk more about that. But I want to give you one little factoid about that. I mean, you know, we could be in, you look around, we could be in New Mexico, and we were driving down, that's what Dana said, you know, the kind of character, the physical fabric of the land kind of looks like the high plains in New Mexico. And it does, and a few years ago, we did a study of the Main Street program over, I don't know, a 20-year period in New Mexico. One of the data pieces that the federal government measures is annually what's the ratio of businesses that are opening to businesses that are closing. And over the long haul, that tends to be about 1.1 to 1.2 to 1, meaning 11 or 12 businesses open for every 10 that close. And again, you have to have more businesses opening than closing, or you have a declining economy. So here's the national numbers. And we looked at the kind of depths of the Great Recession. So in 2007, the recession started at the end of the year, the ratio was about normal, about 1.1 to 1, meaning 11 businesses open, 10 closed. Then in 2008 was about a toss-up. Many closed as open. Then in the depths of recession, 2009 and 2010, more closed than open. Clearly a sign of a declining economy. Then kind of started to level off in 2011. That's what happened in the national economy. Now, most of you know New Mexico, and there's a kind of strip of relative prosperity between Santa Fe and Albuquerque, but most of the state is made up of towns that are not big, high income, high wealth places. They're struggling rural towns. Here was the open to close ratio in in the Mexico main streets. 2 or 3 times the rate that was happening. So independent of the national recovery, they were opening far more businesses in those Main Street communities than they were closing. And Main Street is economic development in the context of historic preservation. It was the character and quality of those downtowns that in fact helped them keep businesses from closing and find new ones even in the depth of recession. We've now looked at this statistic in 6 states, that Main Street program, with the same answer. The same answer. I want to leap to the international side. The Inter-American Development Bank, sometimes a client of mine, but they have for 2 decades or 25 years have been making loans in Latin America for historic preservation-based center city revitalization programs. And then they decided after 20 years, geez, we gotta look and see if this works or not. And so they commissioned scholars in 10 or 12 cities around the world, some that they had funded, most that they did not, but their only characteristic of these communities was that they had undergone historic preservation-based downtown revitalization programs. And they commissioned studies in all of those places to see the result. And you can see these are different countries, different economies, different political systems, doesn't matter. Here, and I read all the studies, all 10 or 12 of them. While there's differences in virtually every one of them, they demonstrated more private investment, more middle-class residents moving into the center city, increasing property values, more businesses, higher tax generation, better property maintenance, lower vacancy. Well, if you were the county's economic development guy, you'd say, well, that's my list of what we want to do with economic development, and that's exactly what was happening in those communities. In Europe, the European Union funded a consortium of 5 or 8 cities on preservation-based center city revitalization programs. And unlike, frankly, even when we have good grant programs, nobody sets up to track what happens. We just have to spend money from Washington and then nobody can track it. Well, the European Union does it. They say, you're going to give you this money, but you're going to have to track what's happened with this. So I just picked 2 of the towns that I happen to be both into. This was in Norwich in England. Pedestrian flows up 60 to 300%. 40% of pedestrians stay longer. 24% come more often. Now, I don't know if any of you are in or ever been in the shopping center business, but those are the 3 variables. How many people, how long, and how often they come back. That's a test of making the shopping center last or not. And in fact, all 3 of those things happen in Norwich. Again, in the kind of ones removed from the economics, 80% of elderly, 98% of families support the project, significant reduction in noise and air pollution based on this heritage-based downtown revitalization program. Then in Ghent in Belgium, 84% of visitors coming back, reduction in accidents in the immediate area, improved access for people with disabilities, reduction of vehicle flows, new cultural institutions established, all as an outgrowth of this heritage-based downtown revitalization. Now, party labels aside, I happen to be of the political persuasion that we should be frugal with taxpayers' dollars. We're never going to have enough, and we ought to be frugal with whatever we have. Well, there's this issue about infrastructure. And when we reinvest in infrastructure in existing cities, and in a place like Trinidad, that means in the midst of our historic building, that's how we're stretching the taxpayers' dollars. There's an interesting thing about infrastructure, is that I'm talking about sidewalks, sewer lines, water lines, curb gutter, street lights, stuff that cities pay for. It has a life based on time, not use. That is, that sidewalk doesn't much care. If it's 1 person or 1,000 that walks over it every day, it's going to last for whatever, 15 years, you got to replace it. The sewer line doesn't care. It has a life based on time. What that means is if we have lots of vacancies, we are underutilizing our infrastructure. It was built to the capacity of a full downtown. And when we have a third empty downtown, it means every day we're piddling away taxpayers' money. It's like buying a new police car, but saying to the chief of police, you can only drive that on Thursdays. Well, the taxpayers would go nuts. But that's what's happened with the infrastructure. In fact, we are not using the capacity every day. Every day, we've thrown away that bomb money that we spent to put that infrastructure in there. And then where it's put makes a difference as well. There was a great study in Maryland done by an environmental economist and investment banker. And they looked at a tax credit program in Maryland. But here's what they found. is that preservation projects save 50 to 80% in infrastructure costs compared to new suburban development. The Sierra Club and the Tea Party ought to be holding hands leading the preservation parade. I mean, this is the ultimate in both environmental responsibility and fiscal frugalness. Then there's the concept of stranded investment. It comes from the utility industry. And if you think about, you're a utility company, you're Black Hills Power and Light, they used to be called Black Hills, whatever it is now. Black Hills Energy. Well, they spent $1 gazillion building a production facility, and another $1 zillion stretching out the power lines to service people. And then at the end of the line, that wheel's not turning, that's a stranded investment. They paid all that money and they haven't gotten it back. That's how we need to think about our underutilized infrastructure. It's a stranded investment. We've spent the money, but it's not being used, and we're not getting a return on the taxpayers' dollars when that's the case. And every time we sit and look at an empty building, it means that we have a stranded investment of that public infrastructure. Those buildings, you may be, if the budgets are up right here for this year, revenue's up, that's great, but those vacant buildings don't produce the revenue that in fact you in the long term need. I did a little calculation in some small towns in Iowa. This size, some of them smaller. And I don't think the numbers would be all that dramatically different in Trinidad than Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where we look at. When we see an empty building, our first reaction is, oh, the poor property owner, they're not getting any money from that, but that's, Dave owns a building, it's empty, she's not getting any rent out of that, but that's her problem. What do the rest of us care? It's a huge difference. And let me show you, it's not that property owner at all. That we have an empty building that sits empty for a year. Well, the utility companies are foregoing $4,700 worth of revenue from the utilities that they aren't selling because that building sits empty. The state government's out $15,000 from sales tax revenues they're not collecting because that building was empty. Local government, you council members and mayor, that they're out $100 in property taxes and $5,000 in sales taxes because that building was empty. That the building owner, of course, is out, no revenues, still have to make the payments to the bank. That the banks are out from money from loans they didn't make, from the deposits they didn't get, because nothing was happening inside their business. Professional services, the accountants, the real estate people, the advertising agencies are out money because nothing was happening. Suppliers that provide stuff for that building are out $1,300 a year in repair and maintenance stuff because the building wasn't in operation. The media, the local newspaper, the television, radio stations are out because there wasn't anything going on. And then workers, no workers there. So there's $56,000 that business would have paid in payroll, $31,000 in the owner's compensation from that small business, $24,000 of workers elsewhere, all foregone income, foregone economic opportunity because that building sat empty. Now, we have a good program that, thank God, was saved in the last, preservationists, saved in the last tax code, and that's the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit. I would be a fan of appropriate incentives, and I don't want to quarrel with other people's deal on incentives, but lots of states, I don't know what Colorado does, so I'm not picking on Colorado, lots of states have movie tax credits. Come here, make a movie, and we'll give you a bunch of tax credits. Well, fine, I don't care, you do that yourself, and there's a little left in catering stuff and everything. But when that movie's finished being made, the deal's done. There's no ongoing benefit in that, it's done. But the historic tax credit means that a capital asset has been created. That's going to produce sales tax revenue, property tax revenue, occupations, income for a generation ahead. Unlike the movie that, we had a nice 6 months because at least James Bond movie was filmed. And it's really a highly leveraged incentive. 20% federal tax credit goes, and so you put in $1 of federal tax credits, $4 is spent by at minimum. By the way, what we found in state studies is that that's really not the case. Is that there's about 20 to 25% of expenditures on a typical tax credit deal that are not eligible for the credit for various reasons. But it's still creating jobs and work. So just in the simplest side, we put a $1 million deal, that's 16 jobs, another 971,000 in addition to the building, in additional GDP, 256,000 in state and local taxation, overall over $2 million of total economic activity because the feds put in that $200,000 tax credit. Now, there's a thing you're likely to hear frequently called functional obsolescence. And my background is a small-scale developer, but mostly as a real estate appraiser before I started doing it. And functional obsolescence is not a myth. I mean, it really exists. There is such a thing. And often this issue about functional obsolescence is used as the excuse to tear the building down. It's functionally obsolete, ergo, we need to tear it down and build something else. Well, that's one solution. But I would argue to do the adaptive reuse is the economically and fiscally and environmentally responsible response to functional obsolescence. That's what you're doing. You're curing functional obsolescence when in fact you put that building back into reuse. There's this extraordinary pattern. Again, I'll talk more about it this afternoon about the catalytic impact of these preservation projects. They're not standalone. In fact, when they happen, things around them start to happen. We did a study a couple years ago for the National Trust that looked at the catalytic impact of federal tax credit projects in 3 states, in Maryland, in Georgia, and in Utah. It was sheer coincidence, I'm sure, that senators from those 3 states served on the Senate Finance Committee. That was just an accident, I'm sure. But one of my favorites was this great former industrial building in the middle of Baltimore. And the developer redeveloped it as housing targeted toward teachers. But it's become this huge center in the neighborhood. And here, in the 10-year period, 13-year period, the city of Baltimore lost 3% of its population. The neighborhood right around this building, in fact, gained 9%. Why? Because people were doing stuff. Oh, geez, that newest building went into play, so I'm going to buy that house. I'm going to do 3 houses. I'm going to renovate it. That catalyzed that activity. Again, this afternoon, I'll talk about some more of that. By accident, I met a guy who's a really geeky, even geekier than I am, numbers guy at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And his university had bought him this gargantuan database of direct foreign investment. So it all tracked out. So some company based in Cincinnati invests in a firm in Johannesburg, or a firm based in wherever, Milan opens an office in Quito, whatever. This massive pattern. Now, us preservationists have been arguing this that I argued earlier, that the economy is moving so that people are choosing where they want to live, jobs are following them, that heritage conservation is a part of that quality of life criteria, and if we're right, there ought to be some differentiated pattern in how that investment goes. At Google or Facebook or Aeroflot, so we're going to make some investments someday. So here's what we did. The database we had to limit it somehow, so at the moment just limited to Europe. We looked first at all the World Heritage Cities, but then limited it to the World Heritage Cities that also belong to the organization World Heritage Cities, meaning they kind of thought this was a big enough deal to join. And then this geeky guy picks comparable cities. So accounted for differences in the size of the city, where they are in Europe, the density of the human capital. And so there were 190 comparable cities, 29 cities in our case study, and we compared the instances of direct foreign investment between the 2 cities. And I don't know why there's the map, and here's what we found. Between the 10 years of that study, the typical one of those cities attracted 41 more instances of direct foreign investment in our heritage city sample than its comparable cities. Well, that's saying what's happening. That's not like a flaky thing just for tourists. It's just something that really means that affects investment decisions. We've been hearing a lot in the economic development world in recent years about placemaking. Oh, we need to have a placemaking strategy. And I don't disagree with that at all. But I'll tell you that historic preservation-based stuff is placemaking for placemaking is a name. I looked at a group that's encouraging building creative places. And here was their list. Here's what you need to do to build creative places. Leverage potential already in place, opportunities for people of all income levels, economic diversity, capitalize on distinctiveness, a place where people want to go and linger, mix of uses and people, connections among people across cultures, pedestrian activity, where business wants to be, different and better future. That's historic preservation. Those are the things that historic preservation provides to a city, all of those. That is creating places. Michigan, in fact, after their kind of collapse of much of the automobile industry, has embarked on what I think is one of the best comprehensive state economic development strategies in the country, and called Michigan Place. And it's a place-making economic development strategy, and with 8 key components. But look at what 2 of them are: historic preservation and Main Street as 2 of their core elements of their entire state economic development strategy. A few years ago, a guy at the National Governors Conference got him a grant, and he wrote this book called New Community Design to the Rescue. He wrote these things, and here are the principles. So I have a set of principles for new community design: mixed use, community interaction, transportation, walkability, tree-lined streets, open space, efficient use of infrastructure, house clusters, diverse housing, blah, blah, blah. Historic preservation, we don't need new community design to rescue us at all. In fact, if we use an historic preservation strategy, those are the things that we're doing. This issue, by the way, of walkability has really become central in terms of an economic development strategy, how important it is, both at the residential side and the commercial side. And in fact, a year or 2 ago, the Surgeon General of the United States put out a document, and the Surgeon General doesn't put out publication very often, but here's what he said. The people who design our cities and neighborhoods should include well-maintained sidewalks, pedestrian-friendly streets, access to public transit, adequate lighting, and desirable destinations that are close to home. Well, yes, people designing new stuff should do that, but he missed the point. Should have done his research better, because in his own field, that of public health, 4 or 5 years earlier, there was this article in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. Neighborhoods built a half-century or more ago were designed with walkability in mind, and living in them reducing the individual risk to become overweight or obese. So the point is that this whole range of kind of contributions that we don't have to invent them, we don't have to go build them. In fact, they exist in our historic neighborhoods. Then this issue about environmental responsibility. I'm not a kind of flag-waving environmentalist, but I think we all have to breathe deep, whatever kind of position to say this is really kind of a critical element of economic development. And I think the closest that we have in the U.S. to a comprehensive economic or sustainable development is, in fact, that smart growth movement. It's not always called that. But they have a set of principles: mixed land uses, advantages of compact building design, range of housing opportunities and choices, walkable neighborhoods, foster distinctive, attractive communities with a strong sense of place. All of those, if you did nothing but had an historic preservation strategy, in fact, you meet all of those smart growth principles. Historic preservation is smart growth. And then skipping back to the kind of international side, here's what the Inter-American Development Bank said: is the international experience has demonstrated that protection of cultural heritage is important, especially in the context of the globalization phenomenon, as an instrument to promote sustainable development strongly based on local traditions and community resources. Now, I am all for heritage tourism. It's great, and you have one fabulous brochure here aimed at tourism. So I'm not diminishing the importance of tourism at all, but my kind of life goal is when you say historic preservation and economic development in the same sentence, that the default response is not only, oh, we must mean heritage tourism. Yes, it is, and that's important. There's a whole other range of things as well. Tourism isn't even mentioned here. So you all know this, the old kind of definition coming out of the sustainability movement is the ability to meet our own needs without prejudicing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In fact, I found a very good scientific study that looked at all the papers on sustainability and the growth of the use of the word sustainability, and they calculated by the year 2020 that every word in every paragraph of every publication would in fact be the word sustainability. But the fact is that when we tear down and throw away the historic building, it is never available for the next generation to use to meet their needs. Never. We have fundamentally violated that principle of sustainable development. You know, every fifth grade kid in America can say, what do you have to do for the environment? Well, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Well, what does historic buildings do? Historic preservation reduces the demand for land and materials. It reuses, it's the embodied energy already in that building. It reuses skills and labor and knowledge. It recycles the whole building. In fact, historic preservation is the heart of sustainable development, you know, the international frame. In the U.S., I know some of you are crusading environmentalists, but to some extent, the environmental movement in the United States has been too myopic and have thought and defined sustainable development as just saving some snail darter in some creek someplace. It's vastly more than that. The environment is an important part of sustainability, but the international framework is both social and economic as well as environmental. And I would argue to you that a historic preservation strategy is in fact the one thing you can do that simultaneously is doing all three of those kinds of sustainable development. And then there's impact on landfill. And this comes back to my, be frugal with taxpayers' money political perspective. There is not a landfill in America where the tipping fees pay the lifetime capital and operation costs of that landfill. None. And between a quarter and a third of everything at the landfill is from construction debris, and a lot of that for buildings we're tearing down. So every time, don't be thinking, when you see a building being torn down, say, well, that guy's going to have to pay the tipping fees of dumping his stuff. No, you're subsidizing it with tax dollars every time that demolition takes place and there's stuff going into that place. We all save our aluminum cans. We're told it's good for the environment, and fine, we all recycle that. So think about a building like this, two-story, mid-block masonry building, 2 stories, 25 feet wide, 120 feet deep. You got plenty of this building in Trinidad and Pueblo, every place is here. So I made the calculation on the impact on the landfill of tearing down that building. What does that do? Well, it's the equivalent of throwing away that building is the equivalent impact on the landfill of the last 1,344,000 aluminum cans we recycle. You know how long it takes you in Trinidad, Colorado to recycle 1,344,000? Just telling you. And then we think about that. There's this whole concept of embodied energy. That when you have a building, that inherently incorporated in that building is the energy that's required to produce it. We had to dig something from the ground or cut something in the forest, process it into a material, haul it to a job site, build it. Each of those has a cost, an energy cost, and when we have a completed building, that energy is embodied into that building. And so if you look at the materials upon which historic buildings are mostly based, timber, brick, plaster, and concrete, the embodied energy coefficients are pretty nominal. What are new buildings built of? Steel, plastic, vinyl, and aluminum. Don't be telling me that we got to be more energy efficient, get rid of those old, energy hogs of old buildings, because this new stuff we can get, our gold star from LEED and brag about it. That's not, in fact, where the environmental side is coming from. We just finished a study in the state of Rhode Island, and we looked at this building in downtown Providence as an example, and we stole the methodology. I'm an unrepentant thief of methodology of this environmental economist in Maryland. And so we said, here's the choices. These guys rehab this building. What if they'd have gone to the edge of town and built a new building, same 40,000 square feet, so function the same. Whatever it does the same one place together. Here is the environmental side of choosing to rehab. 170,000 vehicle miles traveled reduced, 74 to 98 metric tons of CO2 that was not released, 24 to 28 vehicles off the street, 4.2 acres of green field not being used, 2,000 tons of crap that did not go into the landfill, $80,000 worth of natural resources conserved, and infrastructure investment between $400,000 and $640,000. That's being responsible, not just environmental, on the carbon emissions, but in fact on the economy as well. One of the good things that the National Trust has done in the last few years is they established this research center, the Green Lab. And one of their first really good, robust, peer-reviewed studies was to take 3 building typologies with examples all over the country and make the measurements of say, all right, what if we take, usually with older buildings, you have to do some kind of environmental upgrading, make them more energy efficient, that's part of the deal. Say, so what difference does it make in terms of environmental cost if we rehab an existing building and bring it up to speed kind of environmentally and energy use, or we build a razzle-dazzle green gizmo new building with all the stars? What is the difference? Well, it takes 10 to 80 years to recover the environmental cost of just building the damn thing. And most of those buildings aren't going to last 80 years. And almost every building, in every climate, in fact, had better environmental scoring rehabbing the existing building than building a gold star new building. In New York City, before in his last years as mayor, Bloomberg, who was a smart guy, wanted to set the city of New York on the path to be the most environmentally responsible city in the world. Good businessman that he was, he said, step one, we got to do an audit of where we are now. And so they did this giant audit of tens of thousands of buildings in the city of New York on energy use. This was not done for preservation. This was done for his, energy efficient thing. Lo and behold, contrary to what the environmental movements have been telling us for years, saying you got to tear down those old energy laws, the least use of energy per square foot was those buildings built prior to 1930. And every decade that went fast, in fact, there was more energy use than less. Partly because of how the buildings were designed. They were designed before we thought we could just flip a switch and solve all the things. So we had ceiling heights that could carry heat, gas, we had operable windows, a whole range of decisions. We sited it on the site, in fact, to take advantage of that local environment. In the study in Utah, we hired a guy at the University of Utah I love him, he's a really nice guy. He's also really kind of engineering guy. Literally, pocket protector and different colored pens. That's the kind of guy. But he developed this thing called materials flows. It took this kind of whole life cycle of materials. That you got to get it from the earth, you process it into something, you haul it someplace, you put it into a building, you use it for X number of years, you get rid of it, and each of those has an energy cost. And then his methodology was, I'm going to take and apply that to three situations. I'm going to say we rehab an older building, this modest building, 2,200, 2,300 square feet. Rehab it, make it really energy efficient. We go to the edge of town and build a new building, not some McMansion, a house of the same size. Or we tear down the existing building and build a new building the same size in the same place. By far, the least materials flow by 3 orders of magnitude was the rehabilitation. The most expensive was tearing down that existing building, throwing it away, and then building new. So if we're serious about the environment, we ought to think where it's being done. They have a state tax credit in Utah that applies to residents. Average house that was rehabilitated was about 2,100 square feet. Every time the decision was made to rehabilitate instead of raise, that was 116 tons of junk that did not go into the landfill. And then there's this idiot.
He's from Kansas.
He's been in California too long, and he's an idiot. The governor of California, Jerry. Here he is, he's signing a bill a couple of years ago, the end of the legislative session, that essentially banned all plastic bags. Alex Padilla said this society is not sustainable. I agree with that. The same week that he signed the No More Plastic Bags law, he vetoed a bill that would have created a historic tax credit in California that passed in the House 75 to nothing, that passed in the Senate 30 to nothing, and he vetoed it. Yeah, we can't afford it, this is no good. Here's why this guy's an idiot. So I take that. So I make some calculus. I'm a numbers guy. So I said, all right, so we get rid of all the plastic bags in all of California for a year, and it reduces the impact on the landfill by 123,000 tons. Instead, using the tax credit, we reuse, instead of raise, 49 50,000 square foot warehouse buildings, same effect on the landfill. Or we get rid of all the plastic bags the entire year in California. It reduces CO2 emissions by 468 tons. We reuse 5 50,000 square foot buildings, and CO2 is reduced by 530. This guy calls himself the biggest environmental governor in the country, and he's an idiot, is all I can tell you. I don't feel strongly about that. But. So I said, all right, how many people, lifetime use of plastic bags, what does that mean? And the answer is 458. All of the plastic bags used by 458 people over their entire life, based on life expectancy in the state of California, has the impact on the landfill of one 2,200 square foot house thrown away. Where's the environmental responsibility? I just want to kind of be wrapping up with some of this kind of international side, and you may say, I'm in Trinidad, Colorado, wasn't happy with it. He had suggested it has a lot, because I think lessons are learning every place that we can use this. That they're in Europe, and kind of not surprisingly, they're great sources, they're leading the way. But they've really moved on the kind of quantifiable economic impact. Cultural heritage is being discovered by both governments and citizens as a means of improving economic performance, people's lives, and living environments. The economic benefits of cultural heritage have most commonly been seen in terms of tourism, but is now also seen as an innovative stimulant for growth and employment in a wide range of traditional and new industries. European Investment Bank, this bankers, Investment Bank, a couple years ago in London had a session on financing of cultural heritage, because they saw how important that was for their long-term economy. At the beginning of the recession, the European Union held hearings on the role of economic heritage in time of financial crisis. The European Heads of Heritage Forum, which is basically the kind of culture ministers from the country, they meet every year. In their meeting that same year, all the evidence demonstrates that investment in heritage is inherently sustainable, long-term, and measurably successful solution to economic recession. And then the World Bank, the bankers of the bankers, in fact, put out a book a couple of years ago called The Economics of Uniqueness, about the importance of heritage-based strategy in creating jobs, alleviating poverty around the world. So I started up this way. Those criteria of sustainable and effective economic development, every one of those is met if you use historic preservation as a strategy for economic development. So with that, thanks very much, and I'll take any questions, comments, or go back to Washington and communist. All of those are perfectly. So anyone wants to start a question? Do you want to do the kind of self-introduction things?
I really do.
Yeah,
I think it's so fun
Yeah.
to go to meetings like this, and then, you know, to find out who the other people are, especially when you have the mayor of Idaho Springs sitting here, Mike Hillman, and his wife Michelle. They run one of the neatest little towns in Colorado. And then if we could start at this table in a minute. Hi. And I was thinking, you know, he didn't used to talk that fast. But he's become kind of one of the Pied Pipers of preservation that goes around the country. And you know, you've been at this meeting and some of your friends will say, well, you know, how was it? And what did you learn? And I was trying to think how you could answer with just one short sentence and not talk as fast as he did. And I was thinking that maybe you could say, we learned that historic preservation in our downtowns really has to do with patriotism and good common sense. And then that could end their sentence and make me feel really smart. So,
or if you want to feel a little smart, that would make you feel smart. A little smart. I'm more than happy to turn both this one and the next PDFs present into PDFs and give them to the city of Trinidad, and they'll be. I'm more than happy for them to read.
So if we might start over at this table.
My name's Michelle Miles. I'm a local Main Street merchant. I'm on the city council and I'm on the board of the local power authority that buys power for all of southeastern Colorado.
Now, Michelle knows how to talk a little bit higher than that, and she isn't going to repeat what she said, but, you know, they have a really, really great city council here, and with some new members. We have one of them at our table, and so we're so grateful that so many people are here. We've also got people on the Preservation Commission from Trinidad, and we have just a great contingent from Idaho Springs, including the mayor, who just almost never gets out of town because he owns a restaurant, in addition to being the mayor. So then let's keep moving on.
And I'm Sally Gans. I was born here, I've always been here, and I'm just interested in the town because I love it here.
That's a great thing, thank you.
So important.
Yes.
My name's Joe Pinallo. I'm a city councilman here in town, and I was born and raised here.
My name is Frank Leone. I was born and raised here in Trinidad. I've been on the planning and zoning board off and on for 13 years here in Trinidad. And I'm a third generation in the business of sand and gravel and ready mix and landscaping yard here. And I like to see Trinidad prosper and go in the right direction.
Great, and he doesn't have any opinions at all. I had a little talk with him right before lunch. Here's John Carino.
I'm John Carpino, long-term member of the community on both mother and father side, both various families in that area.
How many generations?
Well, Joe and I ended, so three, I guess. Very entrepreneurial type of family. Ran company stores, saloon in one of the mining communities and whatnot. Got themselves involved in macaroni production here in Trinidad. In the farm and ranching, and I was at the college for 32 years as administrative vice president, so I got the public side and whatnot. Very much a private-oriented kind of guy as to where that success comes from, not the bureaucracies and all the rest of this stuff, but how do you get the community to work together, how do you get a vision out there, and how do you all commonly work toward that vision. So that's kind of my history.
So, and our meeting that starts at 4 o'clock will be, if I'm correct, in a building that used to be the Terrabino department store?
The Terrabinos own it, Dana.
They own it.
They own it.
Yeah, we used to call the famous department store.
Oh, the famous department store.
Again, they were retail, wholesale, had bars. They
Great.
did just about everything.
And you're really good to the theater people, aren't you?
Well, we like to think we are.
Great, if we
It's
can
an
move
old
to the,
J.C. Penney building that we renovated for them when a couple of Kennedy wanted to do some theatrical kind of thing and trying to broaden the base of culture and whatnot. And an economic development thing, besides they wanted to live in the West.
those of you who are not from Trinidad will very quickly understand that this is a very generous community. That first time that I came here, somebody came up to me downtown and said, "Here, want an apple?" Let's move back here to this table. Travis?
My name is Travis Cook. I'm one of the Idaho Springs community. I'm a graduate of Clear Creek High School, which was in Idaho Springs. And,
He also went to the University of Texas, but we'll forgive him.
we're from Lawrence. Thanks, Mike, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and I'm involved with one of the historic properties, an old gold mill in Idaho Springs called the Argo. And just happy to be here. Thank you.
My name is Jonathan Kane. I'm a Dole Best intern in Idaho Springs. I'm also a master's candidate at CU Denver, where I'm studying political science. And this is something that I'm hoping to write a thesis on. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Tara Marshall. I'm a former Best and Brightest.
Oh.
Yeah, here in Trinidad, and I'm the Development Services Director and work for the city.
Don?
My name's Don Wilhelm. I've got a couple of historic buildings in town here that I'm looking forward to starting the rehab on Charlotte.
I'm Christian Dublin. I'm one of the owners of the Argo in Idaho Springs. And I'm from Norway.
Hi, I'm Penny Sadie, and I am on the Historic Main Street Board. So go history, we're so crazy about that. I also own a historical building downtown.
Tell them where it is.
It's right on the corner of Main and Animas.
And it's
26,000
gorgeous.
square feet. It's gorgeous. It's adorable.
Was it designed by Rap and Rap?
Yes.
All right, great.
Yes.
Let's move on to this middle table here.
Well, I don't know if I need any more after what Dana has said about me, but again, my name's Mike Coleman. I am the mayor of Idaho Springs. I just was reelected unopposed for my second term. And we just continue to do some amazing things in Idaho Springs. We're really doing the right things, smart growth, and making sure that we just continue our historic character of our town. And we're on the right track.
And they don't care if we visit. They have some very, very good restaurants there. Michelle?
Michelle Hillman, Mike's wife. I'm just here hanging.
Now, wait a minute, there's more than that. We do have a restaurant. We've raised 9 children. We've got 9 grandchildren and 1 on the way. So she has been the rock holding down the household and helping raise the kids.
Favor of that.
Lindsay Valdez, I'm the president and CEO of the Clear Creek Economic Development Corporation, so that includes Idaho Springs, Georgetown, Silver Plume, and Empire, and have worked in CLG communities and with the Main Street program in New Mexico, so I'm 100% on board with what you said about Main Street programs. Really appreciate the power, how powerful it can be in a community.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, can I say one more thing?
Oh, you certainly
Because I'm very
can.
proud of
I mean, because, you know, you're a politician and you're from Texas.
It's a pleasure that I received an award, the Governor's Excellence Award for Downtowner of the Year. So our community, they're giving it to me, but it is our community that made it happen.
Great,
We're very
that's
proud.
wonderful. Congratulations.
My name is Patty Tyler. I am the president of the Idaho Springs Chamber of Commerce. So that's my free hat that I do. I also work for one of the main businesses in Idaho Springs, but I'm very passionate about history, so I hope to be a lot more involved with that. And our Main Street businesses are becoming more and more active with the chamber, so that's something we really want to support, not only their businesses, but making their buildings better and helping them out with that kind of direction. So.
Great. Stephanie.
This is Stephanie Bakken. I work with Dana Crawford. I am a planner, and I think my title for Dana is project manager, and I love coming to Trinidad. So.
My name is Carrie Kienitz. I've lived in Trinidad for a couple of years now. I've done a lot of different things in my life, and just recently I started working with Dana, maybe to be the boots on the ground kind of person here in Trinidad for some of the projects that we're going to work on. Finally have a job where my degree in history could do something.
So congratulations, and yesterday he just renewed got his real estate license, so congratulations. Kelly.
My name is Kelly Eckhoff. I've lived in Trinidad for 2 years as well. My husband and I own a downtown building, and I am Dana Crawford's personal accountant.
Trying to make an honest woman of
It's a little late for that.
But we're hopeful. Be an optimist.
You guys make your damn glass up there.
Right, good. You're Blair.
I'm Blair Miller, and I am a proud board member of Colorado Preservation, Inc. And I'm also a documentary film producer, and we're working on a project called Power of Place, and we'll be looking at some of the work that Dana's doing in Trinidad and Colorado.
Now, you kind of Denver affiliates. I'm hoping that as the days go forward with our conference here, that you will get out and meet some of the other people and not just sit together. How about that? Okay, back to this table.
Oh, my name is Lucille Mattei, and I'm a member of the Urban Renewal Authority Board here in Trinidad.
I'm Anthony Mattei. I'm happy to be Lucille's husband. I'm a 4th-generation descendant of Italian immigrant coal miners. I've been here my entire life, and I spent 40 years in law enforcement with the State Patrol at the Sheriff's Office. 40 years, 3 months, and 16 days to be exact. And this is my 2nd term on City Council. I've been here for the boom, and I've been here for the bust.
So
we're trying to make it boom.
Television not too long ago?
Guilty.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I'm Ed Griego, and I am currently the chairman of the Trinidad Urban Renewal Authority.
And he has a building on Commercial Street.
I do.
And I'm Francesca Villani, and I'm a native as well, and I have 2 historic buildings on Commercial Street, and I'm also a merchant, an ice cream scooper, and also a real estate agent.
And the ice cream is fantastically good.
Thank you.
So let's go to this table.
I'm Stephanie McKay, and I'm not a native. I work with Dana. I live up in Denver, and I'm working to make this Trinidad project screamingly successful.
I'm Nancy Colby, and I went to college here. I love Trinidad, and I'm an admirer of Dana.
and I'm here to learn more of everybody. And again, I love Trinidad, and I hope to do something here.
Councilman.
Rusty Goodall, I've been in Trinidad 27 years now. I'm the former chair of planning and zoning, recently moved to Trinidad City Council, and also the chairman of the board of directors for the Trinidadio Blues Fest.
Trinidadio, doesn't that sound fun?
It is fun.
Hi all, I'm Ryan McWilliams. I'm from Pueblo actually. We have multiple.
It's forgivable.
Yeah, gotta forgive me up front. We have multiple historic properties. I live in an old home as well that's on the historic registry, built in 1892. Dana and I are working on a couple of projects. The power plant in Pueblo actually, which is going to be quite an event. We're having a lot of fun. One of the more
We're in
challenging.
that stage where we need prayer.
Yes, yes, yes. One of the more challenging projects that Dana has, according to her, has ever seen, and so it's going to be really great. My background's actually in the rail industry. We have multiple little businesses in Pueblo, and I'm just here to actually learn as much as I possibly can.
Well, and they have a very unusual city council in Pueblo, and they don't get along very well at all with the county commissioners. And so, as an outsider, they don't like outsiders at all.
Yeah.
They don't think that they have any promise. So I don't know how to handle the situation, but I try to go as infrequently as possible.
I'm Pam Dennehy. I'm the Director of Tourism for the City of La Junta, and I also serve on a 6-county regional heritage tourism board here in Southeast Colorado.
Great. Cynthia.
I'm Cynthia Neeb. I'm the Director of Economic Development and Urban Renewal for the City of La Junta, and we are currently moving full speed forward on the revitalization of the downtown. So we were recently named an opportunity zone, and we're very proud of that.
And previously she was with History Colorado in the preservation office, and so if you want to ask her any questions, I don't think she'd mind answering them.
No, not at all.
Hi, I'm Christina Martinez. I am the Regional Manager for the Colorado Department of Local Affairs for Southeast Colorado, so including Pueblo. So I'd be interested in talking to you guys about some of your work there. I was born and raised in the San Luis Valley, so not too far from here, 7th generation Coloradan on a cattle ranch. So I have been accused of spending too much time in Trinidad, which I think is a good thing. We are oftentimes a funder for infrastructure, and we have several $1 million invested in open projects right now, including Space to Create. We just got an application for the La Puerta development, as well as having invested in several of your street improvements. So we are kind of that player behind the scenes that you don't really always know about, but we're working side by side with you to make your community a better place.
Great, thank you very, very much. Great.
I'm Greg Sund. I'm the Trinidad City Manager, and I've been here for 10 months. I also have a fairly varied background. I've been in city and county management for 25 years, more than that now. And prior to that, I worked in a gold mine, the largest one in the Western Hemisphere. My wife and I owned a bookstore. I owned a sign painting business. I'm a gold and silversmith. So do all sorts of things.
So your presence here makes Trinidad an even more interesting place. So Georgie.
I'm Georgie Clark. I work for the City of Trinidad in Terra Marshall's department.
Right.
Victor Gutierrez. I work under Terra as well.
Right. Andrew.
I'm Andrew Wallace. I am an AmeriCorps Vista working for the City of Trinidad in Economic Development and Community Development.
And probably he might have some advice for you too, but all of us have advice for one another. So that's the reason that as the day progresses, I do hope that you won't just stay involved with the people that you know very well. And I'd probably be around to remind you about that. Cy.
Hi, I'm Cy Michaels. I came here about 35 years ago, moved here full-time about 25 years ago. I'm on the tourism board, the historic Main Street board, the Mount Carmel board, a few other smaller commissions, and I love Trinidad. Welcome to all you guys that came here today. It's really touching that you came to our community and our beautiful place here, and for Dana, and what a great speaker. Thank you.
So Jay, on behalf of all of the rest of us, I think we really want to thank you for making it possible for us to be here at Mount Carmel, and also for saving this building and being so involved with your hometown.
Thank you.
I want you to introduce myself. I'm Jay June. I may be responsible for Mount Carmel Health and Wellness. I'm also a car dealer. I live in Colorado Springs, but I'm here quite frequently. We're also involved in a lot of, not all of it, but a lot of development downtown. And if you haven't been down on not Main Street as much, but commercial, you'll see a lot of things we're doing down there. And there's so much more that we are. It's in the books, so we're not on the books, but we'll be on the books in the future. So,
and you also would be if you're interested in an automobile.
Yes,
I
that's
would
right.
say this, and he can't, but I know I've seen him operate, and you might be wanting to talk to him about your next set of wheels.
And unless you're driving a bus or in a bus, you are interested in automobile, right? Thank you.
Dana, I just bought a car from Jay, and he delivered it down to Trinidad, so if you're in Trinidad and the dealership isn't here, you can bring it down from Colorado Springs. I'm very happy with it. So
Wow, you got an endorsement from the city council. Oh, yes.
She can't even vote.
Sometimes I blend in, I'm the cameraman, but I'm also, as a speaker, graduate of the University of South Dakota. But
Are you really?
Mm-hmm.
When?
1983.
Wow. In what?
Business school. Were you there at that time?
Well, in the business school.
I own the Muller Murphy Funeral Home. I've been doing historic preservation ever since I came to Trinidad. The building is this year's 132 years old, and I just came to visit. I'm still here. But my adventure into historic preservation, the first thing we did 25 years ago after my father died was I converted the carriage house. It's the building right next to the post office. It was a barn, and I converted it to an apartment because nobody's going to laugh about this, but I was 30-something living with my mother, and I wanted to, at least hopefully date sometime. And if I told them I lived with my mother and I was a funeral director, I figured I had no chance. So that's how I got into historic preservation, and then it just grew. Because in 1996 I added a chapel, and in 2002 my wife and I, who works for Mr. Cimino, we remodeled the upstairs. And it was an accidental thing that happened, but I just really have a love and a passion for this old building. It's been my heart and my soul for the 30 years, plus almost 40 years now that I came to visit, and I'm still here. So one of these days when I grow up, I'm going to go get a real job and maybe live in a more modern home, but I don't think so. This really is.
After what you heard today?
Oh, no, I'm being facetious. I love it. There's 5 levels. It's how I stay in shape. I just go up and down the stairs. I forget my keys. As I back up the stairs, I go, to go do that.
I think possibly you have an unknown career in your future as a comedian.
I just tell them the truth.
All right, thanks everybody. You can go, walk up and down Main Street. Be sure to go into some of the shops, tell them who you are, and they're so super friendly. And then at 4 o'clock, Tara, do you want to tell them exactly where they should be at 4 o'clock? And then why don't you talk a little bit about the schedule, the rest of today, and what everybody's supposed to do, and then where we're supposed to be at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Dana. Thank you again to La Junta and Idaho Springs for coming to our event.
And Pueblo.
And Pueblo, thank you. Yes, thank you. I also just wanted to say it was really neat to hear Tom's story. Francesca also has spent, a career in restoring historic buildings, so thank you. Ed owns a historic building downtown, Kelly owns one. Don Wilhelm just got awarded historic preservation tax credits from the state, again, for the Opera House, which is at the corner of Main and Commercial. So when you're walking downtown and you see that building, Penny owns a historic building, and of course, Mr. Terrabino owns quite a few things. They're reinvesting in our community. I think especially after this presentation today, you can see that really we're building the future generations on the preservation efforts that our property owners are making. I want to say that in my 6 years here, I've never seen elected and appointed officials more committed to the redevelopment of a town based on its authentic character, which includes rehabilitation. And I will never forget when Councilmember Miles was in a meeting in 2014, and Tim Stroh from Main Street, who's now working for the State Historic Fund, was here, and she said, "We've got to redevelop these buildings. I want the silver bullet." Tim, what's the silver bullet? And we said historic preservation. So we became a CLG, and we've invested in historic preservation since then. So thank you for coming. I'd like to just do a few housekeeping things. Sure, let me just do the housekeeping, Jay, and then you're up. Go by Francesca's, get some ice cream. You've got a little break. It's just around the corner from the Southern Colorado Repertory Theater, which is located on Main Street. John, what's the address at the Famous? Can't remember the address.
Oh, it's in the 100 block west.
It's in the 100 block. So if you're at Main and Commercial, head west, and it's right there. You'll go to Bella Luna Pizza, and then the Southern Colorado Repertory Theater is right there. We're meeting at 4 o'clock. We have a presentation that you had here today. Out of town, please talk with Dana, her staff, our staff, and we'll suggest dinner places that you might enjoy while you're in town. Some of you already have reservations, I know. Then tomorrow morning, we're going to host a breakfast at Holiday Inn. Everyone's invited. It's going to be a question and answer. So for those of you who hear things in this presentation, or you join us at 2 o'clock and you hear things in that presentation, Mr. Ripkema and Ms. Crawford are going to take questions. So if you have questions about your specific building or a specific thing that you've heard and you want to understand more, we're going to have a roundtable discussion from 8:30 to
8 to 9:30.
Thank you, Georgie. 8 to 9:30. See, I wouldn't be able to do anything without the Development Services staff. 8 to 9:30 at the Holiday Inn. So please be there sharply at 8. We'll get our breakfast. We'll sit down and we'll host the discussion. While you're downtown, Dana was absolutely correct. There's not a merchant or a store that you wouldn't go in that wouldn't give you the history of their building or their business or what's going on. So we really do want you to try and get a sense of the downtown. After the breakfast, before you leave tomorrow, go downtown and kind of walk around. Certainly, we'd love to take any questions that you have following this visit, so don't hesitate to contact the That's one of our planning commissioners there, looking it up on his phone for us. So 131 West Main Street, 4 o'clock, and tomorrow morning at Holiday Inn, which is out on the highway. And at the Santa Fe Trail at 8 a.m. Okay, Jay?
Sorry, yeah, if I may just add one thing.
Sure.
Sorry, don't walk.
Okay.
First, I wanted to say this, that no development in a small town like this can operate, can do anything without the hard work and partnership of the city. Tara is a great example. I know that in our case, she works double time and certainly overtime, and Greg and the mayor and the city council, everybody works together. And if it wasn't for that, we couldn't do what we're doing. So I understand preservation, but I also and people working together. People working together can move mountains. People working not together in any rural town, it's really difficult to do anything. And in this case, I'm very blessed to be able to work with the city I love and with people that are really wonderful to work with. So I just want to say
All right, guys, thank you.
Okay, you have it. Wrestling report.
Excuse me.